The person who ignores you has more control over your mind than every single person who loves you combined. That is not poetry. That is neuroscience. And by the end of this, you will never look at that obsession the same way again. What you are about to hear is not a self-help lecture. It is an autopsy of one of the most quietly devastating psychological traps the human brain can fall into. We are going to go into the neuroscience, the dark psychology, and the ancient philosophy behind why the person who gives you the least takes up the most space inside your head. And more importantly, how you break free from a chain you didn't even know you were wearing. In the 1950s, a behavioral psychologist named B.F. Skinner ran an experiment that accidentally explained why millions of people are currently obsessing over someone who hasn't replied to their last message. Skinner placed pigeons in a box with a lever. Some pigeons received a food pellet every single time they pressed the lever. Predictable, consistent, reliable. Others received food on a random, variable schedule. Sometimes pressing the lever gave food, sometimes it gave nothing. No pattern, no logic. When Skinner removed the food rewards entirely, the first group, the pigeons who had been rewarded consistently, stopped pressing the lever relatively quickly. The behavior extinguished. There was no reason to continue. But the second group, the pigeons on the random schedule, they pressed the lever thousands of times after the food was gone, obsessively, desperately, long past any rational point of return. Skinner called this the variable ratio schedule, and it is the most addictive, most compulsive, most psychologically destructive reinforcement pattern ever identified. Your brain runs on dopamine. And what most people do not understand is that dopamine is not released when you receive a reward. Dopamine spikes in anticipation of a possible reward. The key word is possible, uncertain, maybe. When someone is consistent with their attention, always replies, always shows up, always gives you warmth, your brain receives the reward and then habituates. The spike flattens. You feel safe, but not electrically, consumingly alive. But when someone is unpredictable, warm today, cold tomorrow, interested one week and distant the next, your brain never habituates. Every silence is followed by the question, will they respond this time? Every interaction becomes a potential jackpot. You have become the pigeon, and the person ignoring you didn't even have to try. They simply had to be inconsistent. Your own neurology did the rest. This is why the person who texts you every morning eventually fades into background noise. And the person who went silent for 3 days after the best conversation you've ever had lives rent-free in your mind for years. The brain is not chasing love. It is chasing resolution to a variable schedule it cannot crack. In 1927, a Soviet psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik made a discovery in a Vienna coffee house. She noticed that waiters had a remarkable ability to remember incomplete orders, the tables that hadn't paid yet, the dishes still being prepared. But the moment an order was completed and the bill settled, the details vanished almost instantly from their memory. She took this observation into the laboratory and confirmed what is now known as the Zygarnik effect. The human mind holds unfinished tasks in an active, persistent, memory-consuming loop until they are resolved. When someone ignores you, your story with them is incomplete. There is no closure, no final scene. The file stays open, and an open file demands cognitive resources. It pulls your attention back again and again in the background of every other thing you try to do. This is why you replay the last conversation on loop, why you dissect every word they said for hidden meaning, why you draft messages you never send. Your brain is not being irrational. It is doing exactly what it is designed to do, hunt for resolution to an unfinished sequence. But there is something even darker beneath the Zygarnik effect, something the psychology textbooks rarely say clearly enough. When someone ignores you, they issue a direct challenge to your sense of self-worth. The human ego, at its core, requires acknowledgement to function. Social recognition is not a luxury. Evolutionary psychologists argue that social standing in the group was once a matter of life and death. Being invisible, being overlooked, triggers the same deep alarm systems as physical danger. Roy Baumeister, one of the most cited social psychologists alive, spent decades studying rejection and obsession. His research found something stunning. Unrequited love is not only more painful than reciprocated love, it is more memorable, more vivid, more consuming. Why? Because it is unresolved, because the ego cannot find peace in a story without an ending, and because somewhere in the architecture of our self-concept, being ignored by someone we desire signals something our conscious mind refuses to accept, that to this particular person at this particular moment, we did not matter enough. The obsession, then, is not really about them. It is the ego's refusal to accept that verdict. It keeps returning to the scene of the wound, compiling evidence, rehearsing arguments, imagining different outcomes, because accepting the reality as it stands feels like accepting a diminishment of the self, and the ego will burn enormous amounts of energy before it does that. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who developed attachment theory, made one of the most consequential observations in the history of psychology. The way you relate to the first caregivers of your life creates a template, a script, and you will run that script in every significant relationship until you make it conscious. Mary Ainsworth later identified distinct attachment styles, and the one most relevant to this conversation is anxious attachment, formed when early caregivers were inconsistent. Sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes present, sometimes emotionally unavailable. The child raised in that environment learns a devastating lesson. Love is something you earn through pursuit. Attention is a resource that can be withdrawn, and the person who withholds is the one whose approval matters most. Fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, that child is now an adult. They meet someone who is brilliant, compelling, and inconsistent, and something in their nervous system says, this is familiar. This is important. Chase. Sigmund Freud called this the repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate emotionally familiar patterns, even painful ones, in the hope that this time the story will end differently. This time the withholder will finally see the value you have been offering. This time the wound will close. Dr. Stan Tatkin's research on attachment styles in adult relationships reveals something that is deeply uncomfortable to hear. The most intense and magnetic connections, the ones people describe as once-in-a-lifetime chemistry, are overwhelmingly between anxious and avoidant attachment styles. The anxious person pursues. The avoidant retreats. The more the avoidant retreats, the more electrically alive the anxious person feels in their presence. The more the anxious person pursues, the more suffocated the avoidant feels. Neither is wrong. Neither is broken. Both are running childhood scripts in adult bodies. Here is the critical insight. You are not obsessing over that specific person. You are obsessing over the archetype they represent. They have become a stand-in for every moment in your past when attention felt conditional, when you were overlooked, when you tried and were not seen. The obsession is ancient. They just happen to be the current address for it. And there is one more layer that the most honest psychology will tell you. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between extreme anxiety and extreme desire. The racing heart, the inability to focus, the intrusive thoughts. These are the same physiological signatures as danger and as passion. When someone activates your alarm system, your brain looks for an explanation, and the story it tells is, this must be love. Because the alternative, that you are simply triggered, is not a story that feels worth all this feeling. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This is not motivational poster philosophy. For Aurelius, this was battlefield doctrine written in a campaign tent during a war while managing an empire and grieving the loss of children. He was not writing about being calm. He was writing about being free. What follows is not about convincing yourself you do not care. It is not toxic positivity. It is not just move on. The Stoics were not advocates for emotional suppression. They were architects of conscious direction. The first move is this: name the mechanism, not the emotion. Stop saying, I can't stop thinking about them. Start saying, my dopamine system is running a variable ratio conditioning loop, and my Zygarnik processor has an open file flagged as unresolved. Say it out loud. Say it like a technician reading a diagnostic report. The moment you label the machine with clinical precision, you create distance between yourself and the process. You are not your dopamine spiral. You are the observer watching it run, and the observer can make choices that the participant cannot. The second move is behavioral, and it is brutal in its simplicity. Stop pressing the lever. The variable ratio schedule only maintains its power while you keep engaging with it. Every time you check their social media, every time you reread old messages, every time you manufacture a reason to be somewhere they might be, you press the lever. You feed the conditioning. You reset the clock. Skinner's pigeons that eventually stopped were not gradually weaned off the behavior. They stopped completely. The neurological craving died when the behavior died. Not before. There is no gentle middle path here. The partial suppression of a compulsion strengthens it. Complete behavioral cessation is the only intervention with a clean neurological outcome. The third move is what the Stoics called proherses, the disciplined redirection of will toward what is within your control. The person who ignores you is outside your control. Your own development is not. And here is what those who have come out the other side of this kind of obsession consistently report. The energy that was consuming them, that restless, hunting, sleepless, desperate intensity, did not disappear when they redirected it. It transformed. The heartbreak record that sells 10 million copies, The company built at 3 a.m. when sleep was impossible. The novel written in grief. History is full of people who took the most volcanic emotional energy in their lives and aimed it at something that outlasted the person who sparked it. Not because they found peace, but because they chose direction over drift. You are not fighting weakness. You are managing one of the most powerful neurological forces the human brain produces. The question has never been how to eliminate that force. The question is what you choose to build with it. If this reached something in you, if you recognized a pattern you've been living in but couldn't name until now, then understand that recognition is the first and hardest step. Most people never get it. They spend years in that loop, pressing levers, waiting for jackpots that will never come. The fact that you are here watching this, asking these questions, that is not nothing. That is the beginning of something different. If you want to go deeper into the psychology of power, self-mastery, and the kind of mindset that the ancient Stoics built and modern neuroscience confirms, subscribe. Every video on this channel is built for exactly this. The person who is done being run by patterns they didn't choose. Hit the bell because the next video will continue where this one ends. Epictetus was a slave, literally owned by another human being. And yet he became one of the most psychologically free people in recorded history because he understood one thing with total clarity. The only domain that is truly yours is the inner one. The person who ignores you has not been given power over you. You have not been weakened by your obsession. What has happened is simply this. A very old, very human mechanism has been triggered, and you have been running it unconsciously. Now you see it. The chain does not break the moment you understand it. But it cannot survive your full attention for long. Direct your mind with the same intensity you have been wasting on a silence that was never meant to be decoded. Aim it forward, aim it inward. The most powerful version of you is not built in the moments when everything comes easily. It is built in exactly this, the moment you recognize the trap, choose to walk out, and decide that your mind is too valuable to leave in someone else's keeping. Think about that. SEOTAGS. Obsession psychology, why you can't stop thinking about someone. Intermittent reinforcement, dark psychology, stoicism, unrequited love psychology, attachment theory, sigma mindset, why people ignore you, Zygarnik effect relationships, stoic philosophy, high performance mindset, wealth mindset, dark psychology manipulation, why silence is powerful description. Why do you obsess over the one person who ignores you while barely thinking about the ones who love you? The answer isn't weakness. It's neuroscience, dark psychology, and one of the most powerful behavioral mechanisms ever discovered. In this video, we break down the real reason your brain fixates on unavailable people, from B.F. Skinner's variable ratio conditioning and the Zygarnik effect, to attachment theory, repetition compulsion, and the ego threat response. We also reveal the Stoic three-step framework to reclaim your mind and redirect that obsessive energy into something that actually builds your life. Whether you're dealing with unrequited love, a situationship, or a pattern you keep repeating, this video will give you clarity that most people never find. 000 Hook. The dark truth about obsession. 045 Why inconsistency is more addictive than love. 310 The unfinished file your brain can't close. 600 The old wound wearing a new face. 915 The stoic exit. How to reclaim your mind. 1230 Subscribe and what's next. 1300 Final thought topics. Stoicism, dark psychology, sigma mindset, obsession, attachment theory, high-performance mindset, unrequited love, intermittent reinforcement, wealth mindset, stoic philosophy.